street, I am told, is paved with pure gold, and the sun it shall never go down. There are... All right, chapter 11, starting in verse 41, and I'll stop probably at verse 45. Now every swarming thing that swarms on the earth is detestable, not to be eaten. Whatever crawls on its belly, what would that be? Snakes and snake-like things. Whatever crawls on its belly, whatever walks on all fours, whatever has many feet. What kind of things have many feet? Insects. I mean, you get insects have 6 legs. Arachnids have 8 legs, and then you start getting into things like centipedes and millipedes and other creatures like that that have a whole lot more legs. Whatever has many feet, in respect to every swarming thing that swarms on the earth, you shall not eat them, for they are detestable. Who made them? God made them, and when God made them, he declared them what? Good. Have they changed? No, they're not detestable in the sense that as a thing, they are abjectly detestable. They're detestable in the parameters and the framework of which he is defining here. They're things that are being excluded from participation. You shall not eat them, for they're detestable. Do not render yourselves detestable through any of the swarming things that swarm. How do you render yourself detestable through them? By eating them. You shall not make yourselves unclean with them, so that you become unclean, for I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am holy. And you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on the earth. For I am the Lord, who have brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy. Now I'm going to kind of shift a little bit here and look at this in a tangential way. Okay, so he lays down some reasoning that they should, in the language he uses here, is to consecrate themselves and be holy because he is holy. And then he says, I brought you up from Egypt. And the extension of that is what? I made you a people. So you shall therefore be like me. Consecrate yourself and seek to be holy. And dealing with these things that I've told you not to touch or not to eat will make you unholy, so don't do it. Now, here's the question. If it was important for them who were just delivered from physical slavery out of the nation of Egypt and made a physical nation to consecrate themselves and be holy so they could have fellowship with God and be worthy of his generosity, how much more is it incumbent upon us to make sure that we are consecrated and holy, considering the things that he has done for us? And by the way, the Bible makes those kinds of arguments. If I did this and it meant this, then if I do more, then obviously it's even more important. He's extended even greater grace to us. And because he's extended even greater grace to us, we are just that much more obligated to seek to remain holy. And so if they had to meticulously concern themselves with what they touched and what they ate in order to keep their purity so that they could have fellowship with God, does it matter what we do? And the answer is yes. Y'all have heard of the Gnostics. Anybody know what the fundamental Gnostic doctrine was? No, it's a good guess though. They were stubborn, like a whole lot of us, but that's not fundamentally what made them Gnostic. They had this mystical attitude about things, and they believed that they had special perception. And ultimately, they believed that material things were so unimportant that it really didn't matter what your body did, as long as you were right spiritually. So, if they engaged in immorality with their body, that was not a big deal as long as the spirit wasn't in it. It's the same kind of thing people do today. It doesn't really matter what I do. It doesn't really matter what I eat. It doesn't really matter where I go. That has nothing to do with the things that God are concerned about. God is teaching us through them that what it takes for his atonement to effectively bring us into fellowship with him. He's already supplied the atonement, and we'll get to that discussion a little bit later. He's already supplied the atonement, but in order for it to work for us so that we're in fellowship with him, then we have to be concerned with whether or not we live up to the purity that he's made possible for us. And it does matter how we live our life daily. It matters how we speak. It matters what we do. It matters where we go. It matters who we engage with and how we engage with them. It matters. Now, I don't sit around saying, okay, you can't eat this and you can't touch this and you can't do that, because the New Testament is pretty clear that that's not my job. But as an individual, I look at myself and ask myself, does this reflect properly on godliness? And if a thing doesn't reflect properly on godliness, should I restrict myself from it? And the answer here is yes. Don't, he says, render yourself detestable through these things. And so we have to have the self-discipline. Shouldn't take somebody standing over our shoulder going, no, 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 you can't have that. We should have the self-discipline to say, I don't want to be associated with something that is going to make me detestable before God, so I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to behave that way, or whatever else we might talk about. For I am the Lord your God, he says in verse 44. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy. For I am holy. If we are going to maintain fellowship with God, we must maintain a measure of holiness. Now, the next chapter is going to deal with some very specific things, but we're going to see that what I'm fixing to say is true when we get into the next chapter. Just because someone was made unclean did not mean that they were forever corrupted and unfit. With uncleanness, God also provided what? A way to be restored to cleanliness. And so we have to understand that as well. God is reminding Israel, he brought them out of Egypt, and so he expects them to live a particular way and to behave a particular way. They can't just do what they want to do. They have to be concerned with what is good and what is just and what is holy, because he is good and just and holy. And if they're to be associated with him, then they have to be associated with those things. What if they don't want to be associated with him? They can make that choice and they can live however they want to live. But what must they be prepared to accept? The consequences of that choice. They must be ready to accept the consequences of the choice. And that is still true today as well. Everyone has the freedom to choose, afforded to them by God. No one has the right to take it away from them. God has empowered them the right to choose. Choose you this day whom you will serve. But someone who set forth as one of the most devoted and faithful men in all history, Joshua, he's the one who said those words. He said, "You choose you this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." You have a choice. We have a choice. We've made our choice. And he was urging them to do what? To make the same choice that he made. And that is what we're called to do. Urge people to make the same choices that we're making. That's the only way that we can willingly submit to God. Otherwise, it's coercion. And you don't have anything of any substance. So then he kind of summarizes in these last two verses. This is the law. What does God call it? A law. This is the law regarding the animal and the bird and every living thing that moves in the waters and everything that swarms on the earth, to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean. He gives us the reason. The reason is to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, between the edible creature and the creature which is not to be eaten. This is the law so that you know what is clean and what is not clean. Could they eat something that was unclean? Yes. However, what was the consequence? They made themselves detestable to God. That's the consequence of making that choice. Still the consequences today of making ourselves unclean. When we make ourselves unclean, we separate ourselves from God. Friendship with the world is enmity with God, is the way it's put in the book of James. What does enmity mean? I'm sorry? Okay, opposition, to be an enemy of, to have separation from, to have a barrier, to put a wall between you and it. That's what happens. That's the consequence. He's teaching that. We can be clean or we can be unclean. You know what we can't be? Halfway. Can't be halfway. The moment you go into unclean, you're fully unclean. What if you followed all the dietary restrictions about the animals on the earth, and you followed all the dietary restrictions about the birds, and you followed all the dietary restrictions about the things that was in the water, but you decided to eat the swarming things of the earth? You were unclean. You didn't go, well, I got 3 out of 4. I got 75%. That's a passing grade to anybody, right? 75%? And the answer is no. In fact, that's a really good batting average. Not anybody bats 750. Really good batting average. But I can't say, hey, I average out. I'm better than I am not good. That's not the way it works. I make myself detestable. And there's an important lesson in that. Now, it gets really complicated uh, really fast if we're not careful in this next chapter. Again, only like 8 verses long, really short chapter. Very specific in what it deals with. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, When a woman gives birth and bears a male child, then she shall be unclean for 7 days. As in the days of her menstruation, she shall be unclean. I'm going to stop right there and just ask this question. Okay, why does giving birth to a child make you unclean? Is there something immoral about giving birth? No. Is there something cruel or unjust about giving birth? No. Who invented giving birth? God. Why does this make me unclean? And why does my husband get off the hook? He's at least equally responsible. he was. He was. That's actually a true statement. We'll eventually get to it. Not there yet. He doesn't know that yet. Now, I could do all sorts of gymnastics in trying to explain why. I could go all the way back to Genesis 3 and say, when God said to woman, in pain you shall give birth to your children, that this is a continuation of that idea, that this is part of the pain that he was talking about. Maybe it was. You know what he doesn't ever do, though? He never tells us that. He actually never tells us why at all. Nowhere that I know of, anywhere in this book, does he explain several things about this chapter. All right. We do have this explanation of sorts about why this uncleanness, or not why, um, a, a parallel is brought up. He says, like the days of her menstruation. So during that time, a woman was unclean as well. And then after that was over, they had to wash themselves and go through a purification process, and then they were clean again. And so he says, basically, like it is with that, after childbirth, there's 7 days, which incidentally is the time period that's assigned to menstruation as well, 7 days. There's 7 days that you're unclean. Well, that's if it's a male child. In a few verses, we'll introduce another idea. Anyway, on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Okay, that's what happens on day 8. There is no connection with her impurity as far as I can tell. It's just a timeline thing. Okay, so you get birth, you get 7 days of uncleanness for the mom. Day 8, you get a circumcision for the baby boy. Then she shall remain in the blood of her purification for 33 days. Now, it's already specified that she's unclean for 7 days. Then there's this 33-day period of continued limitation. Apparently, she's not deemed unclean anymore, but she also can't go out, can't have contact with people, can't go to the temple, can't do any of the things. There's this period of purification of 33 days in the blood, whatever that means. And I've read 1,000 commentaries and heard almost that many different explanations. My favorite one was postpartum bleeding, and I'm like, I haven't ever seen anybody that had 33 days of that, much less 66 days of it, which we're going to see in a minute. So I throw that out as ridiculous. I don't. The language is of the 7 days it is said that she is unclean, and of the 33 days it says that she is to remain in the blood of her purification. Purification is a very different word than unclean. Purification is the process of being cleaned. So I'm just going to say that this is a 33-day period before she's pure, or before she can be purified, I guess is the better way to say it, that God has prescribed. And I don't, like I said with some of the animal stuff, I don't think this is a cleanliness thing. I don't think this is a hygiene thing. I don't think this is a health thing. I think this is just a prescribed limitation that God has placed to teach a lesson. And sometimes you do that. As a parent, sometimes you do that with your children. You set limits that don't really have any practical purpose other than to teach that they are to follow limits. And hopefully you're teaching them to do what? To limit and control themselves for the day that you don't have to set those limits. I don't have to say, be in by 9 o'clock. I mean, let's be honest. When we set a 9 o'clock curfew for our children, is 9:15 really that much different than 9 o'clock? So why do we pick some arbitrary number? Again, the point is just to teach them to do what? To be responsible and to follow rules and to pay attention to what time it is and where they are and how long it's going to take to get home and see if they'll follow. So I kind of look at that along those lines. Otherwise, no, and it makes even less sense in just a minute. So to answer your question, David, that's the only difference. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until the days of her purification are completed. But if she bears a female child, all right, we're going to get some relief here, right? She bears a female child, she shall be unclean for 2 weeks, which is twice the duration of the male child, as in her menstruation, and she shall remain in the blood of her purification for 66 days, which is twice the length for the male child. What it boils down to when you put these numbers together is when you gave birth to a male child, it was 40 days before you could enter into the sanctuary again. When you gave birth to a female child, it was 80 days before you could enter into the sanctuary again. And it was 7 days of impurity and then 33 days of the blood of your purification with a male, and it was 14 days of impurity and then 66 days of the blood of your purification with a female child. And when the days of her purification are completed, all right, now with a male child, it's 40 days. With a female child, it's 80 days. When they're completed, for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the doorway of the tent of meeting a 1-year-old lamb for burnt offering and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. What sin had she committed? Don't know that she had. In fact, she had actually followed the command of God, which was, what did God say to men after the flood? You remember what God said? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. It's exactly what she did. So I don't think this is a sin offering in the sense that she's committed a sin. So it makes it a teaching process of some sort. And then we're going to be asking ourselves that question. Okay, what does this mean? The Lord he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her. Remember what I told you? This is all about atonement. This entire book is about atonement. This entire book centers on chapter 16, which we're getting closer to. Everything after chapter 16 is looking back to chapter 16. Everything before chapter 16 is looking toward chapter 16. We're talking about how the unrighteous can have fellowship with a righteous God. How can I go into the presence of God? How can I be in fellowship with God? I'm unworthy. You remember Peter? Well, maybe you don't remember. I've read it recently, so I remember how Peter, that first, I think Leo read about it Sunday, when he waited on the table. That first time that Jesus approached Peter and told him, "Go out to the deep water and cast your nets," and they caught all those fish. Peter realized this is no ordinary man, and he threw himself down and said, "I am unworthy." That is the natural response of someone who understands that I am unclean approaching the holy God. I'm unworthy. Okay, so how can I be made worthy? Atonement. He shall offer it before the Lord to make atonement for her, and she shall be cleansed from the flow of her blood. This is the law for her who bears a child, whether male or female. But if she cannot afford a lamb, then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and I guess I should move that to the next chapter, or 2 young pigeons, the one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her, and she shall be clean. And so we also have this mechanism for what if somebody can't afford? God is not saying, okay, I'm going to deliver the rich, but if you can't give what I asked for, then you're just out of luck. No, he's made provisions for the poor as well. I want to take a few moments in the time we have, because we do have a little time, and that was by design, to flip over to Luke chapter 2. And we want to pick up the reading. Well, I'll summarize the beginning part of the chapter. So, chapter 2 begins with a decree from Caesar about the census. And Joseph and Mary travel from Galilee to Bethlehem for the census, and Jesus is born. Verse 8, in the same region, there were shepherds staying out in the fields, keeping watch, and thus the angels come to the shepherds, and the shepherds head out to go and see and worship the child. And then it says this, verse 21, when 8 days were completed before his circumcision. So on the 8th day, he's circumcised. So we've got 8 days that have come to pass. He's now circumcised. It's the 8th day after he's born. By the way, where was that circumcision performed? In their house or wherever they were at, because she's been unclean for 7 days and hadn't been able to get out and go anywhere, touch anything, touch anybody, have any contact with anybody. Those 7 days, that's why it's on the 8th day. Now the person can come in and circumcise the child. On the 8th day, he was circumcised. His name was then called Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. And when the days for their purification according to the law of Moses were completed. What's that talking about? At what we just read. In this context, since now he is a male child, 40 days have passed. When that happened, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male that opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. We got to go back to our study of Exodus. I think it's chapter 37. Might be wrong about the chapter, but I think it's right. I'll be checked by somebody online. Tell me if I'm wrong. I think it's chapter 37, where he is explaining because of the firstborn thing in Egypt, then their firstborn are all dedicated. And in order, they had to ransom back their firstborn, so they had to bring it to the temple to dedicate. So there's two things going on here. Mary and the baby are brought to the tabernacle, to the temple in this case, in order for the sin sacrifice that's required in Leviticus 12 to be offered for her, and in order for the redemption of Jesus as the firstborn. Um, so you see practically how this plays out. For those 40 days, she can't go into the sanctuary. So she can't go and have the priest offer a sacrifice for her. But as soon as those 40 days are up, you go immediately and you do these things. And this is how following the commandments regarding cleanness and uncleanness affected your daily life. Because on day 41, guess what you were not doing? You were not hanging around the house resting. On day 41, you're trekking yourself to the sanctuary for a sacrifice to be made so that atonement is possible. And God has built in to their daily lives these reminders of what sin does and of what it means to be separated from Him and of what it costs to be redeemed and brought back into fellowship with Him. Because one day, ironically enough, the story we just read about, that little baby was going to actually pay the price to make atonement real. He was going to lay down his own life and pour out his own blood so that the sacrifice that his mother made that day actually meant something. It meant something, but only in connection with what Jesus would do. And it reminds us, those of us who are removed on the other side of the cross, we got an interesting, sometimes you hear people speculate about who had it easier. I think that's kind of foolish speculation. I think we each have our problems. We have the benefit of having the full revelation of the knowledge of God that these people didn't have. We have that benefit. We can have the whole story. We can understand things that they were wanting to understand, but didn't have the information to understand. But on this side of the cross, you know what we're forever removed from? The palpable reminders of the cost of redemption. On that side of the cross, there was animals dying constantly to remind them what it cost to be in fellowship with God. The people that lived and saw Jesus go to the cross saw demonstrated to them what it cost. We've completely forgotten and sterilized the whole event. And very often, I'm not sure we give any thought to what it cost for me to have fellowship with God. But all this is recorded so that we don't lose sight of it, so that we never forget. Uncleanness is not necessarily immoral. In this case, it had nothing to do with immorality. Is immorality unclean? Yes. But just because you say, well, that I don't see anything that's immoral about that, that doesn't mean that it's good. What makes something good? God defines it as such. Circumcision occurred within the framework of covenant identity, right? Well, there's some other things that fall within the framework of a covenant identity. We're in a different covenant. We see access to the holy space being restricted when someone is unclean. When I'm unclean, my access to God is restricted. Birth required an atonement offering. She shall be clean from the flow of her blood. Guess what happens with birth? Blood. What is blood? By the way, it's defined in this book. Life. Life and atonement are being linked together. A burnt offering and a sin offering restore full participation. The priest mediates that restoration. Even when no moral fault is present, access to God requires purification. You know what that's telling me? Nobody, no matter how good they think they are, is worthy on their own merits. Provision for the poor is made in verse 8. She can't afford a lamb, she can bring 2 turtle doves. That is, in fact, exactly what Joseph and Mary offered. So, you know what that tells us about them? They were not wealthy. Life and uncleanness exist together. Despite the fact that birth is a blessing, it involves blood and some measure of uncleanness. The text doesn't condemn childbirth, it places it within the larger system of holiness that God is trying to define. And I don't think it is by mere coincidence that when we die to sin and we are buried into the death of Christ and we rise up to walk in newness of life, that we also are coming into contact with what? His blood. And the atonement that his blood supplies. The chapter does not end in exclusion. Okay, so we've had 2 chapters here that are about what make you unclean and what excludes you. But it doesn't end there. Do you notice where the chapter ends? Somebody teaches much better than me because those kids come out of class excited about having been there. It ends with restoration. That's where this chapter ends, with being restored, with being atoned for, with being back in fellowship with God. And so we see messianic patterns and overtones throughout this, and it shows us or teaches us that holiness reaches all the way back to the beginning of life, and it's every aspect of our being. There's not part of my life that is excluded from the question of holiness. All right, Lord willing, we'll be in chapter 13 next time.
I have heard of a land on a faraway strand. In the Bible the story is told, where cares never come, never darkness nor gloom, and nothing shall ever that beautiful land, on the faraway strand, no storms with their blast ever frown. The street, I am told, is paved with pure gold, and the sun it shall